A bride, porcelain-skinned and draped in satin, should be the centerpiece of a joyous celebration. But what happens when the sanctuary of a wedding becomes a gilded cage of deceit? Tonight we unravel the chilling story of Amelia Blackwood, a bride who fled her own lavish wedding. Not from cold feet, but from a truth so cold it could freeze the soul. She crawled 3 miles through a blizzard. Her couture gown shredded her body half frozen. But the man who found her, the one who wrapped her in the warmth of his own clothes, he was wearing the wedding vest of the man she was supposed to have married years ago. The Blackwood estate was a symphony of ice and opulence. Ancient oaks, their branches heavy with fresh snow, stood like silent sentinels guarding the winding drive. Inside the grand ballroom, chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears, casting a fractured, glittering light on the assembled guests. It was the wedding of the season, a union between 2 of Boston's most influential families, the Blackwoods and the Van Horns. And at the center of it all was Amelia Blackwood, a vision in white, her gown a cascade of silk and pearls that whispered across the marble floors. To the untrained eye, she was the perfect bride, poised, beautiful, and marrying the impossibly handsome and equally wealthy Sebastian Van Horn. Her smile, however, didn't quite reach the crystalline blue of her eyes. It was a carefully constructed mask, one she had perfected over years of navigating the treacherous currents of her family's expectations. Her father, Alistair Blackwood, a man whose smile was as sharp and cold as the winter wind, watched her from across the room. His pride was a palpable force, a suffocating blanket of satisfaction. He had orchestrated this marriage, a strategic alliance that would solidify his empire. Amelia was his most valuable asset, and today the deal was being sealed. Her mother, Genevieve, a woman perpetually swathed in pastels and a haze of prescription medication, drifted through the crowd, her laughter as brittle as spun sugar. She saw the wedding as her own personal triumph, a testament to her success in molding Amelia into the perfect high society wife. But it was Amelia's older sister Beatrice who truly understood the chilling reality of the day. Beatrice, with her sharp, intelligent eyes and a tongue to match, had always been the rebel, the one who had escaped the gilded cage. She had married for love a quiet, unassuming professor, and had been paying the price of her father's disapproval ever since. As the string quartet played a haunting melody, Beatrice cornered Amelia near the towering ice sculpture of a swan. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice a low, urgent hum. Amelia's gloved fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne flute. "It's too late, Bea. Everything is arranged." "It's never too late to choose your own life," Beatrice insisted, her gaze searching her sister's face. "Look at you, Mia. You look like a beautiful, tragic ghost." A flicker of something desperation crossed Amelia's face before the mask snapped back into place. "I'm fine. Sebastian is a good man." "A good man who looks at you like you're a prize. He's just won at a fair," Beatrice retorted, her voice laced with disdain. "Alistair has been grooming you for this since the day you were born. Don't you see? You're just another acquisition." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew Beatrice was right. She had known it for months, had felt it in the cold, possessive touch of Sebastian's hand, in the way he talked about their future, as if it were a business merger. But to admit it, to voice the truth that clawed at her throat, was to detonate the carefully constructed world around her. The first hint of the storm that was to come arrived in the form of a hushed conversation Amelia overheard between her father and Sebastian's father, Marcus Van Horn. They were huddled in a secluded alcove, their voices low and conspiratorial. "The final papers were signed this morning, Alistair said, a note of triumph in his voice. "The merger is complete. Our families are now one." Marcus Van Horn, a man with a face like a hawk and a reputation for ruthless business practices, clapped Alistair on the back. "A brilliant move, Alistair, and the wedding is the perfect cover. No one will suspect a thing until it's too late." Amelia's blood ran cold. A cover. The merger was more than just a business deal. It was a hostile takeover, and her marriage was the smokescreen. She felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to grip the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. Later, as she was being ushered towards the altar, she saw the look on Sebastian's face. It wasn't the look of a man in love. It was the look of a victor, a conqueror. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't go through with it. She couldn't be the sacrificial lamb in her father's twisted game. The officiant's words droned on a meaningless litany of promises she had no intention of keeping. Her gaze darted around the room, searching for an escape. Her eyes met Beatrice's, and in that shared glance, a silent understanding passed between them, as the officiant uttered the fateful words, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony." Amelia's voice, clear and steady, rang through the silent ballroom. "I do." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Alistair's face turned a mottled shade of purple. Sebastian's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure fury. "Amelia, what is the meaning of this?" Alistair boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. But Amelia didn't answer. She turned and ran. The blizzard hit with the force of a physical blow. The wind, a shrieking banshee, tore at Amelia's veil, ripping it from her hair and sending it spiraling into the white oblivion. The cold was a living thing, a predator that sank its teeth into her exposed skin. Her satin slippers were no match for the deepening snow. Within minutes, her feet were numb, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. She had burst through a side door of the ballroom, the sounds of her father's apoplectic rage and the shocked gasps of the guests swallowed by the storm. Adrenaline had propelled her across the manicured lawns, past the frozen fountains, and the skeletal remains of her mother's rose garden. Now, as she plunged into the dense woods that bordered the estate, fear began to seep into the cracks of her resolve. The forest was a labyrinth of black trees and swirling snow. Every direction looked the same, a disorienting vortex of white. The pearls on her gown caught on low-hanging branches, tearing the delicate fabric. The cold was relentless, seeping through the thin silk, chilling her to the bone. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one a painful reminder of the biting air. Her mind, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, replayed the scene in the ballroom. The look of betrayal on her father's face, the cold fury in Sebastian's eyes, the flicker of pride in Beatrice's. Had she done the right thing? The question echoed in the howling wind, but there was no answer. An hour passed, maybe 2. Time had lost all meaning in the whiteout. Her initial burst of adrenaline had faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Her body was screaming in protest, her muscles aching, her joints stiff with cold. She stumbled, her gown tangling around her legs, and fell face first into a snowdrift. For a moment, she just lay there, the snow a soft, cold blanket. It would be so easy to close her eyes, to let the cold take her to drift into a painless sleep. The thought was a seductive whisper, a siren song in the heart of the storm. But then an image flashed in her mind, the face of a young man with warm, kind eyes and a smile that had once been her son, a memory from a different life. A life before the gilded cane had closed around her. The memory was a spark in the encroaching darkness. A reason to fight, a reason to live. With a groan, she pushed herself up her arms, trembling with the effort. She had to keep moving. She had to find shelter. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay here. She tore a strip of fabric from her ruined gown and wrapped it around her hand, trying to ward off the frostbite that was already turning her fingertips a waxy white. She staggered on her progress, agonizingly slow. The world had been reduced to the next step, the next breath. The storm intensified, the snow falling so thick and fast that she could barely see a few feet in front of her. The wind howled like a wolf, its mournful cry a symphony of despair. She was lost alone and freezing to death. Hope, a flickering candle in the gale, was beginning to die. And then through the swirling snow, she saw it, a faint flickering light. A beacon in the heart of the storm. It was a long way off, a tiny pinprick of warmth in a universe of cold. But it was enough. With renewed determination, she fixed her gaze on the light and forced her frozen limbs to move. It was a grueling, torturous journey. She crawled more than she walked, her hands raw and bleeding her gown, a tattered remnant of its former glory. The light seemed to recede with every step she took, a cruel mirage in the frozen desert. But she refused to give up. She held on to the memory of the kind eyes and the warm smile, using it as a shield against the encroaching despair. The light was her only hope, her only chance of survival. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached it, a small, isolated cabin nestled in a clearing. Smoke curled from the chimney, a promise of warmth and safety. With the last of her strength, she pulled herself up the steps and collapsed against the door, her fist raised to knock her voice a frozen whisper. The door swung open, and a man stood there, silhouetted against the warm, golden light of the fire. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face etched with concern. But it wasn't his face that made Amelia's heart stop. It was what he was wearing. A dark grey woolen vest. The same vest her ex-fiancé Jameson had been wearing in the last photograph she had of him. The man in the doorway was a ghost from a past Amelia had tried to bury. His name was Wyatt, and he was Jameson's older brother. The last time she had seen him was at Jameson's funeral 5 years ago. His face, once so familiar, was now a tapestry of grief and time. The laughter lines around his eyes had deepened into grooves of sorrow, and his dark hair was threaded with silver. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two ghosts caught in the amber light of the cabin. The storm raged outside, a chaotic symphony of wind and snow. But inside the silence was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Wyatt was the first to speak, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down Amelia's spine. "Amelia, my God, is that you?" She tried to answer, but her lips were numb, her tongue a frozen lump in her mouth. She could only nod, a barely perceptible movement of her head. He didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man of his size, and carried her into it, kicking the door shut against the storm. He laid her down on a thick bearskin rug in front of the hearth, the warmth of the fire a blissful agony on her frozen skin. "What in God's name happened to you?" he asked, his voice a mixture of shock and concern. He began to gently chafe her hands, his touch sending a jolt of life through her frozen fingers. Tears streamed down Amelia's face, freezing on her cheeks. I ran," she whispered, her voice hoarse and raw. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "From the wedding." She nodded, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through her stiff neck. I couldn't marry him." He didn't press her for details. Instead, he moved with a quiet efficiency, his actions both gentle and firm. He carefully removed her tattered ice-encrusted gown, his touch impersonal, respectful. He wrapped her in a thick woolen blanket, tucking it around her like a cocoon. He brewed a mug of hot tea, lacing it with a generous splash of brandy, and held it to her lips, his hand steady. As the warmth of the tea and the fire began to seep into her bones, the dam of her composure finally broke. The fear, the anger, the grief she had been suppressing for so long came pouring out in a torrent of sobs. She cried for the life she had lost, for the love she had been forced to renounce, for the woman she had almost become. Wyatt sat with her, his presence a silent, comforting anchor in the storm of her emotions. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply sat there, a witness to her pain, his hand resting on her shoulder, a steady, grounding weight. When the storm of her tears had finally subsided, she looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "The vest," she whispered, her voice still shaky. It was his. Wyatt looked down at the grey woolen vest, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Yeah, it was. I wear it sometimes. Helps me feel close to him." The mention of Jameson's name hung in the air between them, a fragile, poignant thing. He had been the love of Amelia's life, her first and only true love. They had grown up together, their families summering in the same small town in Maine. They had been inseparable, two halves of the same whole. They had planned a future together, a future filled with love and laughter, and a small house by the sea. But Alistair Blackwood had had other plans for his daughter. He had seen Jameson a struggling artist with a heart full of dreams and a bank account full of dust, as unworthy of his daughter. He had forbidden the match, using every weapon in his considerable arsenal to tear them apart. He had threatened to disown Amelia, to cut her off without a penny. He had even threatened to ruin Jameson's family, to destroy his father's small construction business. In the end, Amelia had buckled under the pressure. She had made the impossible choice to save her family, to sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of theirs. She had broken off the engagement, her heart shattering into 1,000,000 pieces. Jameson had been devastated. He had pleaded with her, had begged her to run away with him, but she had been too afraid, too trapped by her father's threats. A week later, he was dead. An accident, they had called it. A single-car crash on a winding mountain road. But Amelia had always suspected it was something more, a grief so profound, a despair so deep, that he had simply given up. Now, sitting in the warm glow of the fire, the past came rushing back, as vivid and painful as if it had happened yesterday. The weight of her guilt, a burden she had carried for 5 long years, threatened to crush her. Wyatt, as if sensing the direction of her thoughts, spoke, his voice gentle. "It wasn't your fault, Mia. You did what you had to do." He had always called her Mia, a nickname reserved for only the closest of friends. The sound of it on his lips after so many years was both a comfort and a fresh wave of pain. "I should have been stronger," she whispered, her voice thick with self-recrimination. "I should have fought for him. You were just a kid," he said, his voice firm. "And your father, he's a powerful man. He would have destroyed Jameson, and he would have destroyed you." He was right, of course. She had been young and naive, no match for her father's ruthless ambition, but the knowledge did little to assuage the guilt that gnawed at her soul. As the storm continued to rage outside, they talked. They talked about Jameson sharing memories of his laughter, his kindness, his passion for life. They talked about the years that had passed, the separate paths their lives had taken. Wyatt had taken over his father's construction business, building it into a successful enterprise. Amelia had been molded into the perfect society daughter, her life a carefully orchestrated performance. For the first time in years, Amelia felt a sense of peace. In the warmth of the cabin, in the company of a man who understood her pain, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had a second chance at life, a second chance at happiness. But the past was not done with her yet. As the first light of dawn began to break through the storm clouds, a new sound pierced the howling wind, the sound of snowmobiles, their engines a low, menacing growl. Wyatt went to the window, his body tensing. "We've got company," he said, his voice grim. Amelia's heart sank. She knew who it was. Her father. He had come for his runaway bride. The snowmobiles, a trio of sleek black machines, sliced through the snow-covered landscape like sharks in a placid sea. They moved with a predatory grace, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. At the helm of the lead machine was Sebastian Van Horn, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him sat Alistair Blackwood, his expression a thundercloud of rage. The third snowmobile was driven by a man Amelia didn't recognize, a burly, thuggish-looking individual with a face like a clenched fist. Wyatt watched them approach, his hand resting on the antique rifle that was mounted above the fireplace. "Looks like your fiancé is a man who doesn't take no for an answer," he said, his voice tight. Amelia's blood ran cold. She knew Sebastian. He was a man who was used to getting what he wanted, a man who didn't tolerate defiance, and she had defied him in the most public and humiliating way possible. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Wyatt turned to her, his eyes calm and steady. "We're not going to do anything. You're not going back with them." His words were a balm to her frayed nerves, a shield against the encroaching fear. But she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Her father was not a man who was easily thwarted. The snowmobiles came to a halt in front of the cabin, their engines idling with a low, menacing rumble. Sebastian and Alistair dismounted their expensive winter gear, a stark contrast to the rustic simplicity of the cabin. "Amelia." Alistair's voice boomed a raw, angry sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. "Come out here this instant." Wyatt opened the door, stepping out onto the porch to face them. He was a formidable presence, tall and broad-shouldered, his face set in a grim, unyielding expression. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice calm and even, but with an undercurrent of steel. Sebastian's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking from Wyatt to the open doorway where Amelia stood, wrapped in the woolen blanket. "This is a family matter," he snarled. "It has nothing to do with you. It became my business the moment you chased her into a blizzard," Wyatt retorted, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "She could have died out there." Alistair stepped forward, his face a mottled shade of red. "I am her father. She will do as I say." "She's a grown woman," Wyatt said, his voice unwavering. "She can make her own decisions." "She made her decision when she agreed to marry me," Sebastian interjected, his voice laced with a possessive fury. "She is my wife." "She is not your wife," Amelia's voice, though quiet, rang with a newfound strength. She stepped out onto the porch, the blanket clutched tightly around her. "I will not marry you, Sebastian. I will not be a pawn in my father's business dealings." The color drained from Alistair's face. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice a horrified hiss. "I've finally started living my own life," she said, her gaze meeting his without flinching. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Sebastian took a step towards her, his hand outstretched. "Amelia, darling, you're not thinking clearly. You're overwrought. Let's go home and we can talk about this." His words, meant to be soothing, were laced with a condescending arrogance that made Amelia's blood boil. "Don't you dare patronize me," she snapped. "I have never been more clear-headed in my life." The man with the clenched fist face, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "The lady's had a rough night," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Maybe she just needs a little persuasion." He reached for Amelia, but Wyatt moved with a speed that was surprising for a man of his size. He grabbed the man's wrist, his grip like a vice. "I suggest you take your hands off her," he said, his voice dangerously low. The man grunted in pain, his face contorting in a mixture of anger and surprise. For a moment it seemed as if violence was inevitable. The air crackled with tension, a silent standoff in the heart of the frozen wilderness. Then Alistair, ever the pragmatist, intervened. "That's enough," he said, his voice sharp. He looked at Amelia, his eyes cold and calculating. "Fine. If this is the choice you've made, then so be it. But don't come crawling back to me when you realize what you've thrown away." He turned and walked back to the snowmobile, his back rigid with anger. Sebastian hesitated, his gaze lingering on Amelia's face. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked almost like hurt, before the mask of cold fury snapped back into place. He turned and followed Alistair, the burly man, trailing behind him. They mounted their snowmobiles, and with a final contemptuous roar of their engines, they were gone. Their tracks a series of angry scars in the pristine snow. Amelia watched them go, a mixture of relief and trepidation washing over her. She had won the battle, but she knew the war was far from over. Her father would not forgive her for this. He would not rest until he had made her pay for her defiance. She turned to Wyatt, a question in her eyes. "What now?" He smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes and made her heart do a little flip. "Now," he said, "we have breakfast." In the days that followed, the cabin became a sanctuary, a haven from the storm of Amelia's life. The world outside, with its gilded cages and cruel expectations, faded into a distant memory. The only reality was the crackle of the fire, the taste of Wyatt's strong coffee, and the quiet, comforting presence of the man who had saved her. They fell into a simple, easy rhythm. Wyatt would spend his days working on his architectural blueprints, his brow furrowed in concentration, while Amelia would lose herself in the collection of classic novels that lined the cabin's shelves. In the evenings they would cook together, their laughter echoing in the small, cozy space. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their past, their hopes for the future. Amelia learned that Wyatt had never married, that he had poured all his energy into his work, building a life for himself on his own terms. She learned that he was a man of quiet strength and deep integrity, a man who valued honesty and loyalty above all else. In turn, she told him about her life, about the suffocating weight of her father's expectations, about the loveless engagement to Sebastian, about the guilt and grief that had haunted her for years. She told him things she had never told anyone, not even Beatrice. And with each confession she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a piece of the ice around her heart melting away. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, Wyatt looked at her, his expression serious. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "It's about Jameson," The name, once a source of so much pain, now felt like a gentle echo in the quiet cabin. "What about him?" she asked, her voice soft. Wyatt took a deep breath. "His death. It wasn't an accident." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and ominous. Amelia's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The night he died." Wyatt said, his voice tight with a long-suppressed anger. "He called me. He was distraught. He told me he was going to confront your father." A wave of nausea washed over Amelia. "Confront him about what? About the threats?" Wyatt said, his voice grim. "About what he was doing to you, to our family. Jameson was going to expose him to tell the world what kind of man Alistair Blackwood really is." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, forming a picture that was both horrifying and sickeningly clear. Her father's rage at the broken engagement, his cold, calculating nature, his ruthless ambition. It all pointed to a single, terrible conclusion. "You think my father—" She couldn't bring herself to say the words. Wyatt's silence was answer enough. He didn't have to say it. The truth was there in the grim set of his jaw, in the haunted look in his eyes. The revelation was a devastating blow, a fresh wave of grief and betrayal that threatened to drown her. Her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, had not only destroyed her chance at happiness, but he had also taken the life of the man she loved. The ice around her heart, which had been so close to melting, now threatened to freeze over once more, thicker and more impenetrable than before. She pulled away from Wyatt, wrapping her arms around herself, a shield against the pain. "I need to be alone," she whispered, her voice, a raw, broken thing. She fled to the small bedroom, the door closing behind her, with a soft, final click. She curled up on the bed, the woolen blanket pulled up to her chin, and let the tears come. She cried for Jameson, for the life they had been denied. She cried for herself, for the naive girl who had been so blind to the darkness that lurked beneath her father's polished veneer. She didn't know how long she lay there, lost in a sea of grief and despair. But eventually the storm of her tears subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. She would not let her father win. She would not let him destroy her, as he had destroyed Jameson. She got up and went to the mirror, her reflection a pale, tear-stained ghost. But as she looked into her own eyes, she saw a flicker of something new, something she hadn't seen before, a spark of defiance, a steely determination. She had been a victim for too long. It was time to fight back. Amelia emerged from the bedroom as the weak morning light filtered through the frosted window panes. The grief from the previous night's revelation had not vanished, but had instead metamorphosed. The crushing weight of sorrow had been forged in the crucible of her sleepless night into something cold, hard, and sharp resolve. She found Wyatt by the hearth, staring into the embers, as if searching for answers in the dying flames. He looked up as she approached his face, a mask of weary concern. "I'm sorry about last night," she began, her voice quiet, but devoid of the fragility it had held before. "I fell apart." He rose and stood before her, shaking his head. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Mia. You were hit with a truth that would shatter anyone. The fact that you're standing at all is a testament to your strength." "He took everything from me, Wyatt," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet each word was imbued with a chilling intensity. "He didn't just disapprove of Jameson. He silenced him. He orchestrated my life, my future, my grief, all to protect his own skin, his own deals. I have been living in a mausoleum he built for me." She looked from the dying embers to Wyatt's steady gaze, and a fire began to burn in her own eyes. I'm not going to be his victim anymore. I'm not going to let him get away with it. Wyatt's eyes searched her face, seeing not the broken woman from the night before, but a warrior emerging from the ashes. What are you going to do? I'm going to expose him. She declared the words hanging in the air with unshakable finality. I'm going to tell the world what he did to Jameson, what he's been doing to all of us. I'm going to burn his kingdom to the ground. It was a vow, a declaration of war against one of Boston's most powerful men. The risks were immense. Alistair Blackwood had a reach that extended into every corner of the city, a web of influence and intimidation that could crush them both. He won't go down without a fight, Wyatt said, his voice a grim warning. He'll try to destroy you. He'll call you unstable, hysterical, a jilted bride, lashing out. Let him, Amelia retorted, a bitter smile touching her lips. I've been playing the part of the perfect, stable daughter my whole life. It's time they saw the real me. Wyatt saw the unbending steel in her spine and nodded slowly, a quiet promise in his eyes. All right, Boudica, he said, a faint smile on his own lips. Where do we begin? The cabin, once a sanctuary from the storm, transformed into a war room. They spent the next 2 days mapping out a strategy on a large sheet of paper tacked to the wall. At the center, they wrote Alistair's name and drew lines radiating outwards to his known associates, his companies, his political connections. It was a daunting web of power. They knew that to succeed their attack had to be surgical, overwhelming, and backed by irrefutable proof. Their first and most crucial call was to Beatrice. Amelia found a quiet corner, her heart pounding as the phone rang. Mia. My God, are you okay, Father? He's a man possessed. He's telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown. Beatrice's voice was a torrent of worry. I'm fine, Bea. I'm safe, Amelia said, cutting through the static of panic. I'm with Wyatt, Jameson's brother. A beat of stunned silence on the other end. Wyatt? How? It's a long story, but listen to me. I need your help. We're going to take him down. For good. Amelia then laid it all out, the truth about the merger, the confrontation with Sebastian Wyatt's revelation about Jameson's death, and their suspicion that Alistair was directly responsible. Beatrice didn't gasp or question her. There was only a cold, hard fury in her voice when she finally spoke. I always knew he was a monster. I just didn't know the depths of it. What do you need for proof? Amelia said. Anything you can find. Financial records, communications. Anything that shows the rot inside his business. And B. Mom's diaries. Do you know where she keeps them? In the library, behind a false panel in his desk. Oh, he thinks she's too medicated to be a threat. Beatrice's voice was laced with contempt. I'll get them. And I know a man, Arthur Henderson. Father fired him 2 years ago. Henderson was in accounting. He always said Alistair was running a shadow ledger. He was too scared to talk then. Maybe he's brave enough now. True to her word, Beatrice became their covert operative. Her first meeting was with Arthur Henderson, a nervous man with thinning hair and glasses that perpetually slid down his nose. They met in a dimly lit coffee shop far from the city centre. Henderson was terrified, his hands shaking so badly he spilled his coffee. But Beatrice, with a combination of empathy for his unjust firing and a shared disdain for their former boss, convinced him. He ruined my career, Henderson whispered, pushing a thick manila envelope across the table. Called me incompetent, all because I noticed money flowing into a network of shell corporations based in the Caymans. It's all in there. Oh, The proof that the Van Horn merger wasn't a merger at all. It was a hostile takeover funded by laundered money. Your marriage was the final piece of the puzzle, the PR stunt to make it look legitimate. Next, Beatrice faced the far more perilous task of retrieving the diaries. She went to the Blackwood estate under the guise of collecting some of Amelia's belongings. She found her mother Genevieve in the sunroom, looking frail and translucent, a porcelain doll lost in a haze of sedatives. "Your father is very disappointed in you both," Genevieve said, her voice a distant, floating thing. "And you, Mother, are you disappointed?" Beatrice asked, her voice gentle but firm. Genevieve's eyes, for a moment, seemed to clear. A flicker of the sharp, intelligent woman she once was surfaced. "I am tired, Beatrice. So very tired of it all." She looked away towards the snow-covered gardens, and in that moment of distraction, Beatrice knew she had her tacit permission. She slipped into the library, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found the false panel, her fingers fumbling with the latch. Inside were a dozen leather-bound journals. She took the most recent 5 and fled her mother's silent complicity, a heavy weight in her arms. Back at the cabin, the 3 of them, Amelia, Wyatt, and Beatrice, pored over the evidence. Henderson's documents were a damning indictment of financial fraud on a massive scale. But it was Genevieve's diaries that held the true horror. Her elegant, looping script detailed Alistair's escalating paranoia and rage in the weeks leading up to Jameson's death. The final crucial entry was dated the night he died. "Jay came to the house tonight, so full of righteous fire. He said he would not let Alistair ruin Mia's life, that he would expose the threats Alistair had made against his family." The argument was terrible. Alistair's voice. I have never heard such cold fury. He cornered the boy in the study. I heard him say, "You are a gnat, an insignificant pest threatening my life's work. I will not let you ruin me. I will bury you first." Jay left soon after. Alistair just stood by the window watching him drive away, a terrible, calm smile on his face. He said, "Some problems have a way of solving themselves." God forgive me, I did nothing. Reading her mother's words, Amelia felt a profound, soul-shaking sorrow. The truth was worse than she could have imagined. This was not a crime of passion, but a cold, calculated execution of a threat. Armed with this mountain of evidence, they knew they couldn't go to the police. Alistair had too many on his payroll. They needed to detonate the story in a way he couldn't control. Wyatt had a contact, a respected investigative journalist named Margot Finley, a woman with a reputation for tenacity and a bulldog's refusal to let go of a story. Their meeting with Margot took place in a sterile, anonymous hotel room. She was a woman in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She listened to their story with professional skepticism, her face unreadable. But as Amelia laid out the documents, the financial records, and finally the photocopied pages of Genevieve's diary, she saw Margot's expression shift. The journalist's eyes widened, a predatory gleam entering them as she grasped the sheer scale of the corruption and the human tragedy at its core. "This is monumental." Margot breathed, her professional composure cracking for a moment. She looked at Amelia, her gaze softening with a hint of compassion. "Are you prepared for what happens when this goes public? He will try to annihilate you." Amelia met her gaze without flinching. "He already did that 5 years ago. I'm just returning the favor." The story broke on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't just a story. It was an explosion. "The Blackwood deception gilded weddings and buried secrets," read the headline splashed across the front page and leading every news broadcast. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The SEC froze all of Alistair's assets and launched a full-scale investigation. The Van Horns, their name and fortune, now tied to a massive fraud, publicly disavowed Alistair and filed a lawsuit that would strip him of everything he hadn't already lost. Sebastian, implicated in the cover-up, vanished, his name added to international watch lists. Alistair Blackwood, the titan of industry, the untouchable patriarch, was publicly and brutally dethroned. The final scene of his reign was not in a boardroom, but on the marble steps of his own estate, as police led him away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. In the end, it was his own wife's quiet words written in a secret diary that had become the hammer that shattered his world. His conviction a year later for a litany of crimes from financial fraud to conspiracy and his role in the wrongful death of Jameson Hale was a mere formality. His reign was already over. The trial of Alistair Blackwood was not merely a court case. It was the public dissection of a dynasty. For months, it dominated the news cycle, a sordid epic of greed, manipulation, and betrayal that played out under the harsh, unforgiving lights of the courtroom. For Amelia, it was an excruciating yet necessary exorcism. Each day she walked past a gauntlet of flashing cameras and reporters shouting her name. Her hand held tightly in Wyatt's, his presence a steady, grounding force in the swirling chaos. The day she took the stand was the apex of her ordeal. Dressed in a simple, dark blue dress, she looked small and fragile in the cavernous witness box. Alistair's legal team, a trio of high-priced, merciless attorneys, had one goal: to paint her as an unstable, hysterical woman, a jilted bride seeking revenge. "Miss Blackwood," the lead defense attorney began, his voice dripping with condescending sympathy. "Isn't it true that you were emotionally distraught on your wedding day? That you fled, not because of some grand conspiracy, but because of a simple case of cold feet?" Amelia took a deep breath, her eyes finding Wyatt in the gallery. He gave her a slow, almost imperceptible nod. She then turned her gaze directly to her father. He sat at the defendant's table, impassive and arrogant, looking at her, as if she were a misbehaving employee he was about to fire. In that moment, all her fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. "I was distraught," she began, her voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "But not for the reasons you suggest. I was distraught because I had just overheard my father and my fiancé celebrating my marriage as the perfect cover for a fraudulent business deal. I was distraught because I finally understood that I was not a bride, but a commodity being traded. I did not have cold feet. I had a moment of horrifying clarity." She spoke for hours, her voice growing stronger with every word of truth she unleashed. She detailed the years of emotional manipulation, the threats against Jameson's family, the suffocating pressure to conform. When Alistair's lawyer tried to twist her words, she remained unshakable, her testimony a clear, unyielding indictment of the man who had orchestrated her life. Beatrice followed her, corroborating every detail, her sharp, intelligent testimony, dismantling the defense's narrative piece by piece. She presented the financial records from the brave Mr. Henderson, explaining the complex web of shell corporations with a lucidity that left the courtroom stunned. But the most devastating blow to Alistair's defense came from the most unexpected witness, Genevieve Blackwood. When her name was called, a murmur went through the gallery. She walked to the stand, no longer the ethereal, medicated woman from the society pages. She was pale and thin, but her eyes were clear, and her hands, though trembling slightly, were steady as she took the oath. She confirmed the authenticity of her diaries. She spoke of her husband's terrifying rage of his cold dismissal of Jameson Hale as a problem that needed solving. The prosecutor asked, "Mrs. Blackwood, why did you not come forward sooner?" Genevieve looked at her husband, her expression a mixture of profound sorrow and newfound strength. "For the same reason many women in my position stay silent," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Fear. I was afraid of him. I was afraid for my daughters. I lived in a beautiful prison, and he was the warden. But my daughter's courage has given me my own. I will not be silent any longer." Alistair's mask of composure finally shattered. He lunged forward, his face contorted in a snarl of pure fury, shouting her name before being restrained by his attorneys. In that moment, the jury saw the monster Genevieve had described. The verdict, when it came a week later, was a foregone conclusion. The courtroom was thick with tension as the jury foreman stood. Amelia held her breath, her fingers intertwined with Wyatt's. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we the jury find the defendant Alistair Blackwood guilty." The word guilty echoed again and again for racketeering, for obstruction of justice, and finally for his role in the wrongful death of Jameson Hale. A sob escaped Amelia's lips, a sound not of sadness, but of a profound, earth-shattering release. The weight she had carried for so long, the guilt, the fear, the suffocating burden of her father's crimes, simply dissolved. She collapsed into Wyatt's arms, weeping with an exhaustion that was bone-deep, while Beatrice held them both, her own tears flowing freely. It was over. The months that followed were a time of quiet rebuilding. The media frenzy faded, replaced by the slow, difficult work of healing. Amelia and Beatrice helped their mother move into a small, light-filled cottage by the sea, far from the opulent tomb of the Blackwood estate. There, surrounded by the scent of salt and roses, Genevieve began to find herself again, reading, painting, and speaking with her daughters, with a clarity and warmth that Amelia hadn't known since she was a little girl. One afternoon, Amelia and Wyatt drove to the small cemetery in Maine, where Jameson was buried. She had been dreading this moment, but as she stood before the simple granite headstone, she felt a sense of peace. She laid a bouquet of wildflowers on the grave and told him everything about the trial, about her father, about how his memory had been the spark that had kept her alive in the storm. "I'll never forget you," she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "But I have to live now, Jamie. I have to be happy. I think you would want that." Wyatt stood a respectful distance away, giving her the space she needed. When she finally turned to him, he simply opened his arms, and she went into them, knowing that it was possible to honor the love of her past while embracing the love of her present. Their own love story had unfolded not in grand dramatic gestures, but in the quiet moments in between. In the easy silence, as they read by the fire, in the shared laughter, as they attempted a complex recipe, in the way he would look at her across a room, his eyes full of a love that was both passionate and profoundly peaceful. That autumn, on a crisp, clear day, they were walking through a park, the leaves a breathtaking tapestry of crimson and gold under their feet. The air was full of the scent of wood smoke and the promise of winter. Wyatt stopped beneath a magnificent old maple tree and turned to her. He took both of her hands in his. "Mia," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "When I found you at my door, you were this half-frozen broken thing. And I've watched you day by day, fight your way back to life. You are the strongest, bravest person I have ever known. You fought for justice, you reclaimed your family, and you reclaimed yourself. My life was quiet before you. Now it's full of light. He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. I don't have a ring. I don't have a grand plan. All I have is a heart that is entirely, irrevocably yours. I love you, Amelia Blackwood. Marry me. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The yes that came from her lips was not a whisper, but a song. It was the easiest, most certain word she had ever spoken. Their wedding was everything her first one was not. It took place in the backyard of the small home they had bought together, a rustic farmhouse with a porch swing and room for a garden. The guests were a small circle of family and friends, Beatrice and her husband Genevieve, radiant and at peace, a few of Wyatt's loyal construction crew. Amelia wore a simple cream-colored lace dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning. As she stood before Wyatt, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over them, she saw not the end of a long and painful journey, but the true, beautiful beginning of her life. She had crawled 3 miles through the ice, a half-frozen bride fleeing a gilded cage. But the man who had saved her, the man who now stood before her, hadn't just wrapped her in the warmth of her ex's wedding vest. He had wrapped her in a love that had thawed her frozen heart and shown her the way home. The story of Amelia Blackwood is a harrowing reminder that the most dangerous cages aren't made of iron bars, but of expectations, deceit, and the silent betrayals of those we trust the most. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a story of a woman who clawed her way back from the brink, not just of a frozen wilderness, but of a frozen life. Her journey from a half-frozen bride to a woman who reclaimed her own narrative is a powerful one. If her story of survival love and the ultimate triumph of truth resonated with you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Your support helps us to continue bringing these incredible stories to light.